Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the session, Anja Wehler-Schöck.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's session entitled European House of Cards, where we will look at the future of Europe and what lies ahead for the new Commission. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anja Wehler-Schöck, and I'm the international editor at the German newspaper Tagesspiegel. When I read the title that the organizers gave us for this session, European House of Cards, it made me wonder whether they were referring to a literal house of cards, meaning Europe could collapse like a house of cards in any minute, or whether they were referring to the US TV series and were predicting a bloody mess for Europe. So I guess either scenario would be kind of horrible. So what we'll try to do today is to discuss what the next Commission should do in order to prevent this. I'm thrilled to have four wonderful experts with me on the stage here today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce them to you. First, Peter Hefele is the policy director of the Wilfried Martens Center in Brussels, which is a think tank affiliated with the European People's Party. Secondly, we have Alexandre, who is a member of the Conseil d'État in France and used to be an advisor to President Emmanuel Macron on Europe. Welcome, Alexandre. Third, we have Rahman, who is the managing director on Europe for the Eurasia group. And fourth, we have Slawomir Sierakowski, a Polish sociologist and political analyst, and he's a senior research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations and the president of the program board of the Impact CEE conferences in Poznan and Bucharest. Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. So let's have a seat. So let's start out fairly broadly to set the stage for our debate. Mish, the new Commission will start its work probably around the beginning of November, if all goes well. From your point of view, what should be its top priorities?
So excellent to be here. Thanks for having me. I think the priorities are quite straightforward to define. I think the bigger challenge will be the constraints those priorities face. The priorities, to my mind, are the strategic oversight of Ukraine, in particular the pieces of the Ukraine puzzle Europe is responsible for. So that's shepherding and advancing the accession process and providing the financing to keep Ukraine solvent and afloat. A major reform and upgrade of the European Union's budget. The next multi-annual financial framework runs from 2028 to 2035. The Commission will initiate its proposal in the middle of next year. 75% of EU financing goes on convergence or agricultural subsidies. That's not a budget that's fit for purpose in light of the geopolitical reality Europe is facing. So I think that will be a key priority. And then, of course, there's the competitiveness agenda and what Europe needs to do to maintain its competitiveness. Now, I think that agenda list is quite straightforward. As I say, the major constraints on that agenda, to my mind, are in particular the political developments we're seeing in France. I think there was a lot of anticipation and expectation from the coalition in Germany when it came to power 4 years ago. I think those hopes have been dashed. We have a chancellor who doesn't have a strong pro-European identity. The team around him is not particularly engaged with the European question. The coalition is quite dysfunctional. They're very defensive in Brussels. And you see that reflected across all major policy areas. Certainly that's what I always pick up when I am in Brussels. In that context, France was a major player. Macron, if you think about all of the areas where Europe has been most agitating, Macron has been behind those ideas. Creation of the EPC, common financing for European security and defense, NATO troops in the Ukraine theater, enlargement to Ukraine, reform of the EU to absorb Ukraine, etc. I think we're in a political equilibrium now in France that is highly problematic. A government may form in the next few days. It will likely disintegrate as it comes into contact with the National Assembly, and one has to go back to, I think, the 1950s, frankly, to understand the kind of political political equilibrium France is now moving to. And I don't think that has been properly absorbed and understood. What impact domestic politics in France and the dysfunction we're now seeing is going to pose and constrain the agenda at the European level for the foreseeable future.
So, Alexandre, I think Mish pretty much set the stage for you. You were a Europe advisor to President Macron, and I would say, due to some unfortunate choices, he's significantly weakened right now. What becomes of France as a driver, and also what becomes of the German-French motor that we used to see?
Thank you, Anja, and thank you for the invitation here in Globsec, in Prague. I would be less pessimistic than Mij on the French situation. I would not say that everything is going according to the plan. Yet. But what I would like to say is basically, of course, this is a new situation in France. We're not used to having coalition talks. Usually I read that this is something that is strange to the French political culture. It has not been in the entirety of our political history, but the key point that explains why this is difficult today is that the core moment of the French political life under the French, the Fifth Republic in France, is the presidential election. So all the players on the political spectrum are making their calculus, their computation, according to what will happen in France in 3 years from now. That being said, I'm rather optimistic that we could have first a prime minister and then a government in the days to come. I think that in this regard, what is today important, first I would say there is no power vacuum in France. There is no political crisis, there is no constitutional crisis. There's just more time needed than we used to need to form a government. What there is uncertainty. And of course, our European partners, our international partners, do not like uncertainty, and neither economic players. But there's uncertainty those days to avoid that the day after tomorrow there's instability. And to be sure that stability will come back and will come back as a driving feature of the French constitutional system. I think the president is trying to see what kind of government could pass through the National Assembly. That might happen, I think, first a prime minister in the days to come and forging majorities in the National Assembly. The first big test, of course, will be the budget during fall. And one last element on this, I think that what President Macron wants to ensure when nominating, and that is his constitutional prerogative, wants to ensure that the Prime Minister will drive a policy that might not be exactly the policy that has been led during the past years, but the pro-European orientation and pro-competitiveness and pro-business policy, while of course making our public finances sounder. And finally, I know I'm already too long, but in some words on the Franco-German motor, having experienced that question many times over the years I was in the Élysée, in the temperature of this motor is usually taken every month, and so you have peaks of temperature, moments where temperature is fine, and you can really assess whether this is working or not in times of big political crisis or big crisis. And we saw that during COVID, the Franco-German motor was there to find solutions. And so I think that if we are to come to such a crisis in the months or years to come, we will find again the Franco-German motor to be there.
Peter, you're a German, but you also work for the EPP in Brussels, so you can speak with two hats. Where do you see the priorities, and where do you see the driving forces? Are you confident that the German Franco motor will still work?
Well, I would not put so much emphasis on steam engine because both have run a bit out of steam for different reasons. I see other powers in Europe rising, and this is for me a new architecture in Europe, a new geography of power. We have our Polish friends here, for example. In certain policy fields, we will see different nations playing absolutely leading role. This is a new picture, new image of Europe we will see. In addition, what you mentioned on the priorities, I would like to go back a bit to more fundamental and crucial issues, which we often forget. But, well, giving the title of the cards falling apart, then this problem of representation, for example, in Europe, that's what European citizens very much demand, is not solved. We have to upgrade the way we can participate. Then, in this respect, of course, political parties absolutely play a crucial role. We have huge inequalities among our European nations, and imagine we go really into enlargement that will multiply. No answer for that. You mentioned the topic of budget. Yes, that is exactly the point, and we will see it in the MFF, which priorities are set, and we have to make crucial cuts into existing budgets, otherwise we will not be able to fulfill any expectations. And don't forget fundamental issues such as demography. We have brain drains in the Balkans, for example, Eastern Europe, aging societies. Well, we can talk a lot of fancy policies, but this is the basis for economic power, for geopolitical importance. So that is an issue I would never let aside.
Thank you. Slawomir, you're from Poland, a country that under the new government is trying to again set very constructive impulses for the future of Europe. Where are the priorities from your perspective, and how can Poland become an even stronger force in the new European Union?
Thank you for the invitation. I don't know whether we have a Franco-German engine, but we have a driver. Finally, finally I can take part in the conferences when I don't need to excuse myself or explain my country or what's crazy about Poland. I remember our many conversations with Macron when I was the guy who had to constantly trying to present my crazy country as somebody that it's worth waiting for. And I think now we are a little bit in the opposite situations. So I think we live in a time when official agenda is less and less important, or at least up to date. So, and we don't have a comfort in Poland to follow all the official things, and because we're not bordering Atlantic Ocean, we're bordering Russia, and inside we're bordering populists. And on purpose, I'm using the word bordering because with populists, at least in Poland, we deal with each other like two countries. They present Tusk as a German politician. They really wanted to destroy not only the opposition, but journalists, experts. So when I'm saying we, I can't say I'm neutral, because there is nothing neutral from the populist point of view. As for priorities, I think what we're trying to avoid from Polish perspective is not even a hybrid war, but rather a hybrid peace. So something that usually is presented on the West as we don't want Ukraine to lose, but we don't want Ukraine to win, which is still implicitly behind majority of speeches from Western leaders. So, so this is the priority number 1, 2, and 3. Then second of all, I will follow my predecessor and say that still we have to deal with something more fundamental on the social level. What gave power to populists in Poland were not the fundamentalist voters that usually are the most visible, so they everybody focus on them, Catholic, nationalist, right, but more somebody that we found in the social research as cynical voters, as people who fully agree with the liberal part and they are European, they are culturally same as voters of the liberal parties, but they vote for populists. And mostly, it's not for ideological reasons, but for social reasons. And I think, I can't say that the situation in Germany and in France is similar to the situation in Poland, but I think that a certain structure, and what I mean, to make it short, is some kind of caring about this, or dragging in this cynical voters, which I think now it's your turn, like after Polish.
Yeah.
And then the third thing would be something that, and I don't think there is a good answer for that. And I think we have to find a good answer for that, like what to do with these firebrands, Orban and Fico. I mean, we're here not in Bratislava, but in Prague for some reason, right? And I think like the time has come to do something with that. And I know that like officially Article number 7, and there are not many official ways to do it, but as Prosecutor Jackson said once, this Nuremberg prosecutor of America, like sometimes we have to be practical. So let's be practical with Orban and Fico finally.
So Mitch, let's follow up on that last issue, because you work a lot on Hungary, and Slawomir mentioned Viktor Orban, also Fico in Slovakia. What dangers do you see coming from those countries? Do you possibly see a new axis in the EU as a disruptive force? We could think that the FPÖ, for example, might win the upcoming Austrian election. What concerns you most, and what should be done with it? Should we more work with sanctions, like was it in the case of Poland or Hungary?
So I think the creation of this group, the Patriots for Europe in the European Parliament, to my mind is a very significant development, because it suggests populist groups within the European Parliament are willing to align more strategically than they have been willing to do in the past around this vision of a Europe of nation states, which suggests the Orban worldview has more oxygen, and actually that he is less isolated than one would typically assume, that he's not a sole voice in the wind, but there's a body of opinion that supports that idea, and it is now going to garner significant support within the EP, third largest group within the European Parliament. You know, I think it is a direct confrontation to the kind of populism that is espoused by the likes of someone like Giorgia Meloni, who to my mind is a much more tactical populist. So she identifies quite narrow issues, she plays to those very narrow issues, but then that effectively enables her to run a very centrist foreign policy, European policy, and economic policy that's a lot more constructive. I think the kind of populism we're seeing by Orban, much more ideological, and to my mind, much more problematic over the medium term. Now, the Patriots within the EP are not a major problem for governance per se, because there is still a very large majority from which von der Leyen can draw. The risk, I think, over the medium term is that worldview begins to garner more representation within the European Council. So as you've just suggested, elections in Austria in 30 days, there's a question mark hanging over Czechia and its ultimate direction over the medium term. There's the Slovaks, there's obviously Orban. If you begin to see a constituency within the European Council that supports that worldview, that, to my mind, is a major problem in the ability of Europe to build consensus over all the issues that we're talking about. You know, reform of the EU budget, enlargement, competitiveness, more fiscal support, all of these operate on the basis of unanimity. Final point on Hungary, look, what to do about Orban? I mean, you hit him where it hurts, and that's money. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is 5% of Hungarian GDP. This is serious money. We advise up to 800 investors. Whenever there is a concern about European disbursements to the Hungarian economy, the cost of Orban issuing debt and servicing outstanding debt increases. And so that is, to me, the leverage that the European Union has over Orban, and it should absolutely use that leverage. It should starve Orban of his ability to finance his kleptocracy with European money, and it has the means at its disposal to do that, and I think it should continue to do that.
Mm-hmm. Peter, I know you have some thoughts on these issues. Also, I wanted to ask you, from the point of view of EPP, how do you deal with the new group on the right, and how can we fight the strengthening of populism?
Well, first of all, the results in the European elections have been quite stabilizing, so we get a comparatively stable center, so I'm less pessimistic about the stability. Dealing with these forces, yes, but many mistakes had been, both in Hungary and Slovakia, made on domestic politics, and also parties close to us made some fundamental political mistakes. So this is not a lost case. We have to work also on stabilizing and strengthening the opposition, and I see some signs where we can build upon. On the European side, I would less work with sanctions and things like that. They have always backfired to a large extent. What we have to bring in is a positive notion, and you're right that they're trying to reinterpret certain concepts of Europe, of even Christian democracy, for example. This is where we have to have close eye, that this idea of Europe is not lost or shifted to a certain kind of interpretation, which would be absolutely against the original idea of Europe.
Mm. Alexandre, in France, we also have the spectre of Marine Le Pen looming on the horizon. What was your take on that? Where is France standing right now, and what is on the horizon for the new commission in terms of political orientation?
I think that in French government, even if démissionnaire in French, so soon to be replaced, but very aligned with the guidelines that were presented by President von der Leyen last July. And I would say that from a French perspective, the next month, maybe first we should not forget what we have achieved together during the last 5 years, because this is really quite a lot. We have had many moments where we were fearing that the possibility to find a consensus when needed would not be found. But despite that, the support to Ukraine, the NGU, Green Deal, etc., the migration and asylum pact, we did it. And these are huge achievements. I wanted to recall that because I think that the key features of the next mandate will be first implementing all of this legislation. And we have a lot of constituencies, a lot of stakeholders who are asking us simplification in less bureaucratic burdens, etc. So we have to expect a legislature of the European Parliament that is also about accompanying and implementing for the member states legislation that were passed. Implementing, so simplifying, and investment, of course. Investment will be a key word. It was the key word, one of the key words of the speech by Ursula von der Leyen in July. And of course, this is bringing us to the next MFF. And this is bringing us to what kind of mix, when we speak of financing, between public financing and private financing, we can find. And that's where I would have one other priorities in that respect. It's really time has come to make progress on the capital market union. I think it's really important that when you see that 300 billion euros go outside of savings, go outside the European Union and finance other countries than European countries, we need to find the ways to keep that money into Europe and put it in the European economy.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that later. I want to ask a quick follow-up because Peter gave me the keywords representation and democracy. And Ursula von der Leyen had asked the member states to provide both a man and a woman as candidates for the new commission, and most of the member states chose to ignore this. So what can be done to achieve her goal of parity in the new commission, or do you think we'll have an almost all-male commission on the horizon?
Well, we're not set to have 27 men as commissioners.
Well, 7 women, I think.
No, it's not the case. I mean, I'm not sure that I would put demography and equality between women and men in exactly the same political category. But answering to your question, the thing is that it's a member state responsibility. And some, like France, had already commissioners who happened to be male, and that France wanted to see staying in Brussels. Then, for member states who want to appoint new commissioners, well, there's a strong encouragement, I think, coming from the Commission, and for the remaining ones to present female candidates. In the end, and let's just also recall that today the scenery of the top jobs is 4 women and a man. Maybe not forget this, I think, excellent development.
Slawomir, I wanted to come to you. In terms of political orientation, we'll likely see a disconnect between the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament. How can this be bridged, and what challenges do you see in that regard?
Let me first come back to this.
Yeah, please do.
Because, by the way, we could start with the panel construction, because we are all men. You're
yes.
the moderator, so.
And we're sitting on the Albright stage, so very, very telling.
Right. Poland has a very good candidate, but I wouldn't mind if there will be certain changes in this way. And by the way, Tusk has there is a certain leverage on countries, especially those ones that just overcame populists, because the women's right in Poland is a big issue. And even when Poland was supposed to choose what's the main priority for the Polish presidency, the choice was between like defense or security and women's rights. So push Poland. That would be my message to you. Other than that, I wouldn't agree with one of my predecessors who said that sanctions don't work. I remember one of the, I don't know if Mark Leonard was there. Were you there when we had a conversation with Jim O'Brien? Yeah, right. So Jim O'Brien this was the head of sanctions on Russia, and the sanction issue is very complicated, and usually goes like the real way goes very differently than we read it in the press. Sanctions usually work, and they worked in Poland. One of the reasons why liberal side won elections were the recovery plan that was suspended for populists. Hungary is a very unique case. Hungary is a very, very different. As Orban said, Hungary borders itself, right? And this Trianon syndrome is something that you don't have maybe you have it in Russia, but you don't have it in the European Union. So to approach to Hungary should be very, very specific, but should be, finally. I remember for 8 years they were supporting each other. We were the hostage of two guys. I mean, I don't want to see that anymore. And I don't want to listen about paragraphs, articles, like, let's do something finally. And when the EU broke so many red lines when it comes to fiscal union happened to be possible, buying weapons happened to be possible, so maybe doing something with Orban can be possible. And this is how I try to avoid your question about Parliament Commission.
Alexandre mentioned the Capital Markets Union. Enrico Letta just presented a very large paper on the possible or the necessary reforms that the EU should do in order to ensure its competitiveness. What do you think should be on the top of the list of the Commission? And do you think it's realistic that these things will be implemented? Enrico Letta moved more in the direction of savings and investment union.
I have great respect for Enrico and the report he did, but I think, frankly, the talk of capital markets union is complete nonsense, and it's used by policymakers as a panacea because there's a recognition that mobilizing European taxpayer money is going to prove too politically challenging, and as a result, the kind of default position is the private sector needs to do more. Well, if you look at Ukraine, for example, pre-war GDP was 100 billion, 150 billion. Post-war reconstruction needs are 600 billion. You're not going to get the private sector to rebuild Ukraine. It's ultimately going to be the European taxpayer. That's going to have to come from the MFF, or it's going to have to come from some next generation EU-type facility, which ultimately is contingent upon European taxpayers. And it's for that reason I come back again to the domestic political complex in France and Germany. It's not to say everything depends on France and Germany, but I think when it comes to moving big money at the European level, you need the buy-in of Paris and Berlin. And I disagree with Alex on the political situation France is confronting. I think whatever government Macron ultimately stands up will not command a majority, so well short of the 289 seats required to be sustainable over the medium term. It is highly likely to fall when it tries to promulgate a budget that meets European fiscal rules. That will demand a correction of about 0.6% of GDP. I don't see any minority government in Paris being able to do that. And then when you think about moving serious money at the European level, you need a majority in the National Assembly to agree to that outcome. And that is the one thing France is not going to be able to deliver, arguably, between now and 2027. So there's the tough question to ask is, how does von der Leyen move her agenda forward in light of the political reality that we're seeing in France? And I've not even begun to talk about, obviously, the very dogmatic fiscal debate. In Germany, where you have a country with a debt to GDP ratio of about 60%, but a coalition that's scrambling to cut 30 billion from the budget next year as they run into flat growth because of a ruling from the Constitutional Court that says the way the coalition has been financing itself is effectively unconstitutional. I mean, these are the fiscal questions that I think are hanging over the next mandate. The private sector is not going to solve them.
Mm. Peter.
Just may add a point. I think if we sit together in 2 or 3 years, the issue of European revenues, origin revenues, will be on the table. This is the big Voldemort nobody's talking about. We avoided this in the election, for example, but giving the balances, the imbalances, I would rather say, on the debt we have accumulated in Europe, there is no other way. We have to talk tough on that. Will Europe have its own revenues? Wherever it comes from, but this is the big issue we cannot avoid any longer to talk about.
Alexandre, since Slawomir chose to dodge my question on the political disconnect between the different bodies, you get to answer it. How do we bridge it?
Sorry, but again, the question.
The political disconnect between a new commission, the European Parliament, and the Council. How does the EU function, and how do we bridge these disconnects?
Well, I think that the political disconnect is a bit exaggerated. First, the Commission organization and the political families, let's say, represented within within the European Commission are just replicates of national governments and their political affiliation. So that's for the one thing. Then when you have a look at the European Parliament, I think that Peter said it, the center held. Of course, there was a shift to the right, but in the end, the center held. And the majority that re-elected Ursula von der Leyen was bigger than 5 years ago. And there are still even probably votes that really can come into majorities for proposals that would be presented by the European Commission. I think that one of the main features of the new European Parliament is probably, but I think Peter's joy, or that the EPP not only is extremely strong, but is also in a way the pivot group. In the previous European Parliament, you could have majorities without the EPP, and I think that something like 10% of the files were adopted by, let's say, center and left wing, including the Greens majority, so 10% of the files, that majority does not exist anymore. So the EPP has a lot of cards in the hands and therefore a huge responsibility for the years to come. So for me, the question is not really the one of the disconnect between the three institutions. The real question is the one, I think, flagged by Mij of, say, governable European Council. And to what extent will some other leaders than Orban and Fico continue or confirm a shift of Eurosceptic stance. For me today, the less clear picture that I see on the European political scene is the President of the Council in Italy. I still can't explain the reason for the no in the European Council and why Fratelli d'Italia did not support Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament, because it was, well, I think there was a discrepancy between what we've seen as kind of a Europeanized Italian government over the last months and years and what happened during the summer.
Mm-hmm. Mich, I know you want to follow up on this?
I guess my sense, Alex, is...
Thank you.
Because von der Leyen managed to pull in the Greens, her majority has been reinforced and she's actually less dependent on support of the ECR and Meloni. And so really to send the signal around ambivalence to von der Leyen, that Meloni is still needed. is why she voted and her group voted the way it did in both the EP and she abstained in the European Council.
But that explains July. That does not explain June. But
Okay, if Peter quickly, and then we'll...
To mention that we have really a stable window for the next 3 to 2 years, because with the Council, the Parliament's majority, this is quite unique. I think we should use this consensus to a certain extent. I'm quite sure that Italy will also join in many projects. I'm least concerned about Meloni's position. What I do not expect is any major institutional shifts between, say, the Parliament and the Commission, which we had seen much more in 2019. The framework remains more or less stable, and it depends indeed on the cohesion of the parties and the groups. And, well, some parties didn't play very well in this respect.
Before I open the floor for the audience, I wanted to come to Ukraine, which we've only touched on lightly so far. Slawomir, where do you see the EU headed on Ukraine, both in terms of accession, but also in terms of security, for example, creating joint procurement within the EU on defense?
When it comes to accession, it's very hard to say or to compare the reality with what is on papers, right? So probably reality looks worse than papers. But one thing is clear, no matter who's gonna win elections, Europe will have to take more responsibility, like financial responsibility, and also when it comes to weapon. And I think it can be good for the EU, not only for Ukraine as well, because we are in the similar place, and we can be next. And from this point of view, I'm quite happy that there is certain shift from like the traditional Franco-German position to more like, well, of course we have in this region narcissism of small differences between Poland, Czech Republic, and so on. But still, I think that it's also a good time to overcome this, or to integrate the region that Rumsfeld called New Europe. But I think there is something in it. Like we're having more, and we should take more and more political responsibility for the EU. Pushing also the EU to take more military responsibility for what's going on in the broader European map.
Peter, you want to speak?
And to emphasize that, I think enlargement, whatever and however it might happen, is not a one-way issue. We have underestimated what it really means for us, and well, we see the budget risk, for example, but I see more the chances for a transformation of the old European Union. This is a gigantic momentum we should use, and it's not sold very well in the political communication. I would put an emphasis on the next Commission to really put the positive impacts, as burdensome they might and painful they might, but this is the only way to move the whole carriage further on.
Maybe I would like to add to one thing as a Polish romantic, and, that if the condition for the victory of Ukraine will be met in Kremlin, right, then something will also happen important in Belarus, because it's a clear function of what's going to happen in Russia. And Belarusians shouldn't be forgotten here, also because, again, we were good experts on Ukraine, and we are also good experts on Belarus. And this country, we call them Protestants of Eastern Europe, because even if the director of Kolkhoz is ruling there, still it's a country that is 3 times more affluent than Ukraine. It's not because of Lukashenko, it's because of Belarusians. And what happened in 2020 was they just went 500 kilometers mentally to the west, and they are still there, and they are still fighting. Maybe now only like learning Belarusian, because only 10% of the society learn Belarusian, but they are doing this work. They are like in the situation of Poland in 1983. But 6 years after we had this window of opportunity, they're going to have it as well. So whenever we talk about, and also Ukraine will never be safe if Belarusian will not be free. But then Poland will never be safe if Belarus and Ukraine will not be independent. And if Poland won't be safe, you will lose Tusk as the only really experienced and tough leader in Europe that I see now.
And let's not forget Georgia, which is the most immediate challenge. We have the elections now, and the whole Caucasus and the Black Sea region is at stake in this respect.
Absolutely. I can add Armenia and Moldova. There are also same people as we, and a huge culture, and we need them, they need us.
I want to give the audience a chance to participate with their questions, and I see one right there. You'll get a microphone. Please briefly state who you are and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Lalita Sigana. I'm from Center for Geopolitical Studies in Riga. I just wanted to follow...
please stand up, please.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on the question on Belarus. There, of course, was a big prisoners exchange, exchanging opposition leaders from Russia. Is there something that European Union could do about Belarusian political prisoners? Because we know that the regime has been cracking down on them for much longer than in Russia. Thank you.
I'll take a second one. Okay, if there is none at the moment, please go ahead. We've had a question about a possible Belarus prisoner exchange. Slawomir, do you want to take it?
I'm the Minister of Belarus here, so but there is not much leverage on Belarus, unfortunately. But there is some, and it's a Belarusian border with Poland, transport, and that means also you immediately bring in China there. Because you know the transport from China goes through Belarus, a big part of it. And the sanctions, so sanctions is another leverage, and the third thing is surprising Lukashenko. Don't confuse these guys; they hate each other, Lukashenko and Putin. And the better liar is Lukashenko, by the way. He was lying to Russia for like more than 20 years. That like give us cheap petrol, and I'm going to have same currency as you have in Russia, same Supreme Court as in Russia, same legal system. Like he promised everything, he delivered 10%. So playing with these two guys, being tough on the border issue and transport issue, and then the rest is the question of time, because it's also not it's not by chance that he's freeing certain prisoners. He started and he will continue.
Thank you. I'll take a question from Slido. We have a question on how countries in Central and Eastern Europe can follow the Polish example and become stronger, a stronger force within Europe, and what role they can play under the new commission. So maybe Slawomir, you want to take a start, and Mitch, I know you have thoughts on this issue too, so maybe you want to follow up. Yeah.
So this is the first one, right? The red one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So like the question was like how to follow Polish example, right?
Yes, but we have a couple of questions on the CEE and on leadership, so feel free to expand on the issue.
Well, I touched the topic when I wanted to go deeper into the social field of it, so like how to deal with certain parts of electorate. Like my message was like clear, so like don't put to the same basket the voters of populists. They are fragmented, that different, and some of them are to be, I can't say bribed, because there are also good guys there, but if you live in the province and somebody talks to you about the Supreme Court or free judiciary, they don't know, like or free media, they don't have the same newspapers because they don't reach them. So like this would be my thing, and it was a huge surprise in Poland when we realized that they have two electorates. So like if I would suggest something like follow closely this example of how the constituencies are really built in the countries. Don't go through stereotypes like good guys, bad guys. It's more complicated.
Okay, which maybe focusing a little bit more on defense, Poland in NATO and Poland as a strong defense actor, for example.
Yeah, so on the general question of leadership in Central and Eastern Europe, I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for this view. It's often talked about, obviously it will be talked about a lot at GlobeSec. I think there's a difference between a real leadership vacuum in France and Germany because governments are weak and struggling, and a geopolitical context, obviously a threat to liberal democracy on Europe's eastern border that is motivating politics in this part of the world. That creates a context where Central and Eastern Europe can lead, and the actual leadership decisions involved in taking decisions that actually involve very tough choices and have real implications. For example, if we are serious about absorbing Ukraine into the EU, that will ultimately mean a budget outcome that converts all net recipients into net contributors. Kind of where is Central and Eastern Europe on the question of Ukraine's accession if that were the fiscal reality of the, if that process to conclude in that way. And I think when you pose those tough questions, this question around leadership becomes a bit more abstract and a bit more challenging and a bit more difficult.
I know that Alexandre and Peter also want to chime in. Alexandre?
Yeah, I tend to agree with me, but with maybe a different perspective on the question of leadership. That in the European Union was constructed to avoid or to avoid leadership, or at least the leadership, the imperium of the one. And in the same respect, the idea of the center of gravity shifting east or north or south, etc., does not mean to me a lot. When you read the French historian Fernand Braudel, center of gravity in Europe in the 14th century was in Venice, then Genoa, then moved to Amsterdam, then London, and after World War II, it moved to New York. Maybe today it's in Washington, I don't know. But most probably in the economic powerhouse of Europe, i.e. Germany, and politically probably Brussels. I think that the question of leadership is not necessarily the question that we absolutely need to ask ourselves. But the question of the weakness of some governments as a concern that I can understand, of course.
Still, if you see how policy concepts are developed, it's very much the Western and Central European lenses still. And I hope that we have strong new commissioners, for example, in the future upcoming years, that they will really bring in the perspective from Central and Eastern European countries. There's a lot of potential in the transformation there.
We have another Slido question. I don't see any on the floor right now, regarding the digital and green transition. Alexandre, would you like to start? How can the new Commission further the digital and green transition?
Yes, I think the question is further, because the legislative acts, we have them. I mean, the whole package of the Green Deal, the DSA, the AI Act. So the question is, how do we implement this? And how do we accompany both households, economic operators in implementing this in the time frame of implementation that is foreseen by those legislation? And we'll just give one example, the Clean Industrial Act that was announced by President von der Leyen last July. It's a lot about that. It's how to ensure that while complying with the requirements of the Green Deal, our business still can remain competitive. So it's really a lot about this, and this will require as well investment, even if the sources of investment should be more public than private, if I understand Mich correctly.
And that is, by the way, an issue on populism as well, because there is an underlying social dimension. We have seen this, if we ask middle classes in Europe, the fear of falling down is huge. And if we manage to create new sources of value, that could also help to give a vision to them.
Mujtaba, are you confident that the new Commission will advance on the digital and green transition?
I don't have a huge amount to say on this. I suspect this will be an area of policy that von der Leyen tries to advance, and it will in part depend on whether she can sustain the support of members of the European Council and the Greens in the European Parliament. But I don't have much to add to what Alex said.
Slawomir, since we're heading towards the end of our discussion, I wanted to ask you, when we convene 1 year from today, what will Europe look like?
Are you serious?
Please tell
Look
us.
in the glass bowl for us.
There will be, I believe, France will still think that there is no leader in the EU, which actually is exactly the opposite what I heard from France for the last years.
No, sorry, seriously. When you listen or read at the speeches by President Macron, he never pretended that France was a leader.
I thought
Never.
that there was a leader without a state.
Without a state.
In the
No,
EU.
seriously.
I mean,
Okay,
okay,
well,
doesn't matter.
We'll agree to disagree.
You can say a collective leadership.
Okay.
Intellectual leadership is what we've had from the
Yes.
Elysee, but that's the truth, though. If you look at all the major areas of policy where Europe has been agitating, those have the Elysee's fingerprints on literally all of them. So I do think intellectual leadership is certainly something Macron has done.
Okay, we'll let Slawomir finish his crystal ball gaze.
Well, in France, I think we have clear choice, either king, philosopher, or revolution. And I think now we have a revolution time, so we'll see what's going to happen in 3 years. But in 1 year, well, I think the war will still be going on. I hope Tusk will play a positive role. I think the more quiet you are about the green and digital things, the farther you go, including Tusk also. I remember how populists behaved before, and actually they were shouting, they were bullshitting a lot, but inside they were much more cooperative than when we could expect. Green Deal was broke by one of Polish commissioner who was hardcore populist. With Tusk can be even harder, and also for Germans, Tusk will be a much harder partner than isolated, poor and quite crazy government that ruled Poland before. So I hope Poland will play a positive role and in 1 year to go. But so shortly speaking, I don't know.
Well, I guess we all don't, but I'm glad that we had such a rather positive tone on this panel regarding the future of Europe. Thank you all, dear panelists, for participating. Thank you, dear audience, for following our session. And please stay tuned, because in a little while we'll have the Prime Minister of the Republic of Albania, Edi Rama, joining us on the stage, which I'm sure will be a very interesting discussion. So thank you all very much, and see you in a little while.